from Argentina. Professor, if you please. And conference 2 will be regarding university training, the questions of the stage direction, the identity of the theater of objects on the expanded stage, with Professor Ana Alvarado, also from Argentina. Please, Professor.
So we make the conferences, and afterwards we have a debate where everybody can use your voice, you can reflect, make questions, and we are going to have two monitors, Raineri and Tamara. They will be around to register. Um, Raineri is outside now, but you can make your questions. People from outside as well. So you write down your questions, and then it is going to be brought here, and people could participate. We are online in the YouTube channel, Provocation 2019. Everyone can ask questions. Lucas and Anna are going to make the relation with the people online and our conference. So I pass the table to Professor Tito. Tito. Good afternoon, everyone. I will going to speak in Spanish. Uh, Before, I would like to start commenting something, an issue, because I received lots of messages by WhatsApp and by mail as well, manifesting the support and the help, because help the talk we have in the beginning, it was about the subjects that are um, supporting the problems of teachers and professors and students from university. Lots of people that are expressing support and appreciation, and they want to help. If you want to make make inscriptions, they are eager to help with their signatures, so they are supporting our cause. I would like to refer about the issue, the subject that we are going to deal. I'm going to read some parts, the others I'm going to speak, and then we have a conversation if possible. I would like to refer to the issue of the master, the people who forms the director that deals with the wide spectrum of the scenic arts, the creator that creates animated forms. And because most of times we just don't act only, we have to direct as well. What happens with the academia related to that? If you look a little bit about the historical development, it's not always the, the academia, it's a part of the university. We know this from the Middle Ages, from the 600s, 1700s, when you started to open its doors to artistic expressions. It is something stronger in the 800s about the scenic arts and also the theatrical issue. But in the field of the puppets, the animated arts, it's just in 1952 when you created the first career, the university career, about the puppets. It happens in Prague, with Jan Malik, I think you could inform me better than me, but it is in this year where you have the appearance of the first gesture, the theatrical gesture about the puppet theater that starts to be part of the academia. And we are in the last part of the 60s, or where you have other universities in Russia as well with courses with using traditional techniques, and it's late is something new in relation what is the new marionette, the new uh, puppets. When you have a mix of techniques, you can appreciate the classical techniques, but you can have a way in direction of other kinds of art. The Latin American reflex is later on. It is in last century, and there are some strong expressions in Argentina about the uh, teaching to use the puppets. You have in the Neuquén University, Rosario, Tucumán, in the northeast of the Argentina as well, Misiones, after the province of Buenos Aires. But Buenos Aires didn't have the capital, didn't have a school formation that was something wider, with the intention to investigate or to create new arts. You have the creation of a formation program in the San Martin Theater, and there was a group of puppet masters in this theater of San Martin, and then they start this program of foundation in the year 1989. I was lucky to participate in this group that we were with Anna in this group of formation for several years, and I had the chance to go with them in their classes as something that I helped them. I was a theater master, and I have a certain experience of using the puppets, but I didn't have the experience of teaching how to use them. And then 1 year later, there was another one who had an experience and had more knowledge in the transmission of knowledge about the puppets. The one who received this knowledge that he could expand himself as a creative artist. The body of professors that we covered this school, we didn't know very well how to face the task, because each one was a specialist or an expert in this on field. But how can you form someone who is going to be a master of the puppet artist? uh, we had a talk with Irina, and Irina also mentioned this scenical figure. It's an architect and a poet as well, and we need to know, or we to have certain knowledges, but at the same time we deal with other knowledges that we are not very well acquainted. We have to reinvent constantly what kind of artist you are. So I ask myself, after so many years, how can you form someone who is going to form someone? How do you form a professor about this kind of theater? If you, it's
Like I mentioned, in 1700s, 1800s, once these training spaces for actors and dancers started happening, then methods started happening. But in the beginning, it's always very difficult because we're always in search of these spaces, and we have to, after all, learn are not sure where to go when we don't have these masters. The thing, an Argentinian dramatist, and he's one of the most specialized dramatists in Argentina. He's a master of, he can train a lot of actors and dramatists, and he's very passionate about puppetry and dramaturgy, and so he had to reinvent himself every single day. I think there is maybe a problem with the sound. Can you please hold a second? Okay. And like I was saying, Mauricio Cartun, he is passionate about puppets and objects and the metaphorical possibility that they could offer. And we were working there on the same day, so we talked a lot about that. And we would ask ourselves how to do this, how to conduct this. We have experience from our areas, from our fields. He has experience in dramaturgy, and I'm a specialist in theater. So what's the need for the puppet artists? Can we help these people? Can we help these students, or are they going to be just, or is it going to be just a theatrical repetition? What is the specialty? How can we help them? And so it raises the question, what's the profile of a master, of a professor? What does a professor, a master need to know and in order to fulfill the needs of this student? And that's how that's how an experiment, this experiment with constant search for for spaces, and that's how it all started. And this required a connection, a nurturing, however that may be, with other experiences throughout the world, in other countries, in other contexts, and therefore it's this sort of meeting is extremely important, like the ones we are experiencing right now. It's a place where we can share, agree or disagree, discuss and learn, know each other's paths in regards to their own cultures, where they choose to work and specialize. So this question actually led us to a constant research using the students' energies as well as the professors in order to teach and that's how we learn as well. Without obviously we can't forget that we also had to face dialect problems and to teach known ways in order to face unknown ways. And this has always been the paradox that we face without being sure if we were going to find any truths. And it's a broad field like any other art. They merge, and so many objects can assume a puppet theater characteristics, or they can nurture each other, or even find new horizons. Of course, the paths will be marked by each director and by each aesthetic. I would also like to emphasize the animated forms, which was actually created in Brazil. This expression was created here in Brazil, and I would like to emphasize that because what I find in this definition, I find a broader significance and global, which is more appropriate, which includes object theater and puppetry in all of their forms. Teaching in Latin languages means to pass the this object. So we need to add what we have to teach, and that's based on our experience. So the tradition cannot be imposed automatically. You also need to receive tradition, but like Cartoon says, there is a moment where the master cannot teach the student any longer because the questions overcome the answers that the master can provide, and then it means pedagogical significance because it brings the need to constant research from the student's perspective as well as the professor's. What does the professor needs to face? He needs to deal with the fact that he doesn't know everything, so he needs to question himself. How can I answer that? I'm the one who has to provide the answers. So it deals with going beyond the limits of each field, because it means, first of all, to know what each field is about, to know their borders and their limits, and then overcome these limitations and to try to understand the analysis of a play or choreography or direction or musicals or pictorial from a creative perspective, not only semiotics, to appreciate what the materials are, the palpable materials are, which are not concrete, of each play, in order to understand the creative process and not just to copy, but to have inspiration, to look at new scenical ways based on the context of what has already been done. Workshops, and more workshops to face your fears, to decrease tensions, and let this flow. And in these workshops, the training, there is the theoretical training, of course, but especially regarding the dynamic of the creator. I would like to share some opinions regarding the role of the professor, of the master, in the thesis, the student's thesis, and so how their creative process happened. What is the role of these masters during this period of the final thesis? What position should a teacher face in order to follow on this creation and strengthen the individuality of the production and to help to build a personal style? And at the same time, this thesis cannot be an extension of the master. We have to be present, but at the same time distant enough so we can look at it from a perspective that we can look at the errors and mistakes. It's a choice. It's based on aesthetics or forms. Therefore, this can be an act of freedom for the student. And this imposes a new situation, which is the change of the student's role, because overall, what happens is these thesis dissertations of the students, a same student can be a director of a play created by the same group, but normally he becomes a director for his colleagues, and that is something new that generates stress, and we have to understand that these stresses can affect the performance. And this has to do with the emotional connections and not only the technical ones, after all. This is not to say that the master always has to intervene and needs to be the psychological support. No, that's not the role of the master. But at the same time, the professor needs to be sensitive and attentive enough to these situations in cases where these situations might call for it. The play you need to overcome these stress and anguishes, and you need to help the students to face this. It's a journey, really. To be a professor, it's always a privilege and an opportunity, I think. Directing is a dramaturgical problem. I think it's important to talk about the issue of dramaturgy, because you cannot separate the director. There is no barrier between dramaturgy and the director and directing. They both complement each other in this scenic, in this performing space. In theater, animated theater is clearly not a previous situation. This is a consequence of the need to fixate in words a action plan of what we're going to be telling, and including productions where it involves dramaturgical texts and all. So what's actually necessary in the training and these sort of interpreters is to include essential elements of theatrical writing based on the hypothesis that it offers dramaturgy, a teaching of dramaturgy for puppet artists or object artists, and this may help for them to have a clear idea in their creative process and the need to create units or image cells as a mechanism to produce and will leverage actions. All working in order to create a previous unit that will generate the discourse based on a scenic fact. Eduardo Tato Pavlovsky, a psychiatrist, actor, director, and dramatist from Argentina, said that image is the first thing. It's visual and normally it's static. You have to start moving in order to create a previous story of movements already. The story of movement is not there, just the consequence of it in a fixed image. It's a moving image that will be repeating the script essentially, but we'll be creating some new gestures and that's how we're gonna give life to what was dead. I'll mention Alvarado. Presently, it's very possible to start from an image and these in order to generate dramatic writing. But there are very few attempts in order to change this relationship between words and image in order to let the latter multiply, except in some scenic dramaturgies that actually don't even know what it's about. For puppetry and object theaters, they're very linked to images, of course, and more closely to the scenographic script. But the relationship between the object itself. Dramaturgy has a directing problem, I think. The production of dramatic writing starts in learning basic dramaturgy techniques. So you need grammar in order to write. You need to just learn how grammar doesn't make you a poet, but it offers you elements that'll be useful in the moment of creation. At the same time, to learn techniques, pure writing techniques in a workshop seems like an academy where we can gain strength. An interpreter, a scenic interpreter in a physical training, for example, he gains strength by stretching and resistance. This is not the place to exercise subtleties. Because some poetic form may be lost in this practice. However, the workshop or a class or is a place where they learn how to exercise basic techniques. The tools that create theatrical action, at the same time scenic dramaturgy for objects, but without a doubt the creativity is born from these other spaces that are not from common classes, but from rehearsals and creation, where we go into new territories, unexplored territories. Regarding directing in the rehearsal space, I call rehearsal space as a poetic lab. The rehearsal is a very singular space where we think very little. So there were a lot of intense situations and revealing situations that happened there, and then after we try sometimes in the scenery this doesn't end up happening. Sometimes improvising with objects causes a continuous movement in the interpreter in a form of flow where the exploration becomes vertiginous, because this presupposes in game of operations that happen at the same time based on a metaphorical flow, and you need a lot of readings, and the object theater provides. We saw this in Jair's workshop in the morning, for example. The task of the director in puppetry is to occupy this macro vision space where he can synthesize and take into account these micro poetics that happen in these lab spaces, in these lab rehearsal spaces. The most delicate part of directing, especially that involves the generation of these states, it happens in these rehearsal spaces where the director should take care to have a creative atmospheres for the actors so they can go in search of this poetic search. And they also should keep up with the rhythm and the the cardiac beating, the heart beating of the actors, so that so that some unexpected results may come. So it's necessary in the training for directors. You need these essential elements. First of all, you need to have technical techniques which are extremely essential to manipulate space, architectural elements, and then dramaturgical abilities in order to create objects, and to have the tact in order to create a proper moment for creativeness to happen in these labs, where you'll be building the most part of this creation. And last but not least, to recognize the limitations of your own resources, the interpreters, or the scenic objects, or even possibilities for infrastructure. Very well. Now I'll be talking about theater within the universities. In Argentina, in the National University of San Martin, in 2004, we saw an opening for some creators, for some artists of puppetry, so they could hold their own research and issues related to this topic and to the community as well, how to contribute to the community as well through the university extension using these productions that were generated then. In 2006, we were able to create a training program, and in that year we had a format, in a diploma format. It was a course, and it was an exploration of new ways to train. And this is just what I was talking about before. What does an artist need today? Of course, I already asked myself this question at the time, but today the answer would be completely different, because you need the same artist 10 years ago. And it seems it doesn't seem a long time, but actually reality today is totally different. We are facing constant changes, and this, for example, is very necessary. Sometimes the academia is very strict and attached to certain programs, but art is always on the move, is always changing, and so the need of the students is always on the move. And a lot of times professors are attached to a curriculum because he hasn't transformed himself at the same time, or at the same rhythm of his students' needs. With the goal to change this and to adapt to these necessities, we've changed the program, the curriculum, year after year. in UNSAM, in the National University of San Martin. And so we were able to create a teaching program in puppetry and objects that started in 2012. 2012, yes. It was there was the first group of graduates that so it became the fourth graduate course in Latin America. In Mexico, there are in the south of Mexico there are a lot of universities with training programs for puppetry, and in Brazil as well. I don't know if you're aware, but there are 36 universities in Brazil that offer puppetry courses. It's a very high number if you as opposed to other programs in the world. In this puppetry world. So we saw this goal in this teaching program, like I was mentioning before. Our goal was to maintain these teachers, masters, artists alive so they could teach. They were not professors that only performed art, but they were artists themselves with the ability to teach. It was just the opposite. That way, we kept this training alive. So we have different formats of training that change according to what we end up feeling around and that we believe are the needs of our students. And we keep testing these with other cultural movements. One form of production as a way to teach and to learn and research that we found was a format that is the extension, the continuity of teaching, which is the creation of a art company. And so we created the puppetry company of San Martin with Carlos Almeida, who was director of the first play. And the format that we had was where we were able to unite a professional artist, a puppeteer with experience, a professor in his career and students in the career who were able to work at the same level with this professional and this master. This became a process that grew a lot over time for students who were lucky enough to participate in it, and we were also able to create a few pieces here that I would like to show you some images of. I would like to share these images with you. Some performances that we produced. This is Salvajada, Cartoon in Lorefice, directed by Lorefice, and the other is Life is a Dream, directed by Almeida, and the other is The Diaries of 15, directed by Ana Alvarado. In this company, in addition to this company where students had contact with professionals, of very experienced professionals and teachers, we were also able to have a constant production with the students, and not only within the company, but in the sense that the professor would direct the students or guide the direction in each subgroup of students. That way, there were performances like Babylonia, Portal, and many others. Unfortunately, this company that received many awards for each of these productions, like this one that you're looking at right now, this is the Diaries of 15. Two participants, which were students, and I think that's a good example, They won awards for acting in this theatrical universe, although it was an object theater. Unfortunately, this company no longer exists. They closed down a few months ago due to which have to do with what we talked about yesterday. And so we are also manifesting in order to renew this company. I think that this model, this training model, is a model that we could try and test it out. It works really well because of the results that we've had in thinking about the students, already graduated students. And so they're able to make their presentations in different kinds of festivals or work abroad. Another student of ours created a performance in Bratislava in an exchange program, and his performance actually won an award. We've had students that are actually touring constantly. So this is just a little bit of what I wanted to say in closing. Thank you.
Now I pass the table to an Alvarado. Uh, so good afternoon. I'm going to talk a little bit about me. I'm going to tell you about me because maybe you don't have any idea about me. My name is Ana Alvarado. I am theatrical director this moment. I work with object theater, puppet theater, and actors theaters. I direct. I work as well with other scenical arts, with more performatic style installations and so on. And I think also the idea of my presentation is to think about the scenic presentation as something possible for all languages. That's the experience I had. It's an experience that it was not forecast in the beginning, but that's the way it has happened. So when I teach, I live this, and I was invited here as a pedagogist here. So when I teach, I have this background, I have this experience that I can't avoid. I try to split direction for actors and for objects, but I can't do that really. So I try to find what are the useful parameters for the scenical direction in all the cases. Irina has mentioned that yesterday as well, and I think that part of I do is already reported here by Tito Lorefice. I worked for 20 years in a group from Buenos Aires, which is a puppet group of San Martin theaters. I used to work with puppets. I was director as an author. We have the director of Adelaida Malcaide, a company that has been in Buenos Aires for many years. So I have spent a long time of my life working only with puppets and near objects. In this period, we have also formed with other Buenos Aires artists a group that was called El Periférico of Objetos. And in this group, we used to explore language borders, frontiers. We used to call this the object theater. And there was this expression that started to be known, that started to circulate. This sentence is joined to the theater of Alquicin, but this name, this expression of object theater started to be uh, started to circulate in this puppet world, and we use this a lot, and we called ourselves the object peripherics because we are the periphery of the periphery. The life of this group was related more to the events and festivals of theater, much more than festivals of puppets. It has happened this way. I can't explain very well, but I think it was the proportion that we have. The knowledge of these two things was. Middle by middle, we worked with objects and actuation. We have the intention to approach new technologies, new kinds of dramaturgy. We have a split in 2018, and the last show was the Child Manifesto. One of the directors of Peripheric of this group is Emilio Garcia Wellick, that comes to Brazil very often, but it's more related to the performatic theater. And I wanted to tell you that to justify a little bit what I'm going to tell you about the scenical direction. Today, besides working in Unisan, is the Tito's University, as we also have cuts in budget as well. I work in other university in Buenos Aires that is called UMA, Art University. And this university has a program of actors and a program of scenic direction, but doesn't have any puppet uh, course. But we succeeded in creating 2011 a theater of objects, interaction, and new medias. This post-graduation program tries to generate a debate of a possible meeting between the theater of objects and the new elements that we know that are related to technology. It's a post-graduation program that has a very practical goal because we work with object interpretation, but we also have hybrid objects, electronic ones, and also we study computer programs to generate new digital experience with the works. What I wanted to show you while I'm going to work about scenical direction, I wanted to show you some images of these students of this post-graduation program doing their works, how they explore these borders in their classes. It's not my work, but it's their work. And sometimes they have public, sometimes they don't. But it's important to show you what could work as a door to know what I do. And if you want to know about more about my personal work, I have a website called anaalvarado.com, which is not always updated, but and the peripheral group of objects is as well in the website, and you can watch some things. But as I mentioned, I am a director of objects and also actors, and I use other experience as well. So I'm going to show you the images now, and while you watch these images, you are going to see this one. That's because the professors from the post-graduation program, we have written this book, which has a difficult title to translate it. And as we work with that, we ask ourselves about the body and this new virtual space. There are some parts of the presentation that I'm going to read, so please don't take out the light because people could sleep. It's from the 60th minute, and now you are going to watch situations, not finished shows. The title of my presentation, I, I will stay with the sound so you could better understand, but it's just a background for what I am telling you. I like to have this in the shows to work with images and another meanings that you have in the text. I think that makes us reflect a little bit more. You can ask yourselves why this woman put these images while she's talking about something else. The title is the object theater inside an expanded scene. It's related to what I mentioned. That's the task we have today, which is to teach, and we live in this constant expansion of arts. They are that arts are hybrid. They are getting new modifications. So I'm going to talk along this presentation about some points. I'm going to talk about object theater, expanded theatrical scene, post dramaticity, performance, biodrama, and object theater that is documental. And my objective is that this would be similar to a class that I have, where I try to explain to the students what was the pathway of the scenic direction the last years. Several examples that you can see, they are from Argentina, and I'm going to mention artists from my country. Maybe you don't know them, but it's a way to present them, to put on your mind some names of people that they perform very interesting works in Buenos Aires, which is a very theatrical city. I arrived to the university because of my artistic career, but I am in the university for several years, and I thank a lot because I had the opportunity to put these things in works. Besides this book, I have another one which is dramaturgic objects, and it's an effort to explain you what is dramaturgy, what is this object dramaturgy from my point of view. During all these years that I am a professor, 40 years, I have put myself the question, is it possible to teach something in the world of arts? Everything that we do, is it possible or not? So there are some aspects that they are possible. First, in relation to the work that we try to develop the creative capacity, the students of scenic direction, they need something to pull them to develop the creative capacity, something that works with capacities. The director is not an organizer, is someone who has to create. I hope nobody's looking at me. You were watching the video, but it's good. I'm happy. Well, so I have some items that are important from the scenic direction: the development of a creative capacity, the knowledge of the cultural context where they are inserted, that I was commenting on. People must know where they are. They are in Buenos Aires, in Latin America. What kind of theater you are doing this place? This is very important for a directing or student. And how is this language nowadays? How this language is in the world today? Currently, there is a course that I give which is practical. I don't talk about the art history, but I make people think about some points related to history. Another important point to work is that directing actors, that could be actors or puppeteers. All the directing students, they have to direct, they have to be self evaluated and evaluated by me and their colleagues. We evaluated the director's body, his relationship with the students, the way he put himself in the scenes. All this material is possible to be analyzed. We can do that. We can work with other people's creativity, and it helps us to assess our potential. During several years, the Senate direction was taught. Most of the institutions dedicated to this subject reading works of theater and analyzing in a structured way, and after performing the presentations. It has happened during many years in the teaching of scenical direction. This kind of processes still happens. No problem. We can still start from a text, analyze it, put this text in scene like a representation. But if we are working inside an age context, we couldn't be closed. Then we would go back to to the starting point of the 20th century. We have to have other tools. We have to use and transmit other tools. So I have already discussed this issue in the class. It's not demand to to go from this way of writing. And after dramaticity as a concept shows to insinuate that you have something after the dramatical contest based on the written word. And after the 20th century, you have a relationship between the presentation and the representation of things. There is an expanded theatrality, the change of hierarchy between the written word and other compounds. The scene is shared with the ones who watched, the inclusion of the real things, the performatic change, and several other topics that have been debated since the 20th century. The concept of post-dramaticity is very useful to talk about this age and period. It's interesting to consider Oscar Conrado words. When everything is post-dramatic, the concept of post-dramaticity will be already fulfill this meaning, and the space of dramaticity will mean that you have to have new concepts. In our experience with students, I mentioned post-dramaticity. In pedagogical terms, it's very clear this change of direction as a representation of texts in this new post-dramatic objects. This object things is very current in this concept of post-dramaticity. After the 20s, when you have this definition of object theater, we are mentioned the post-dramatical theater. So it goes with the other scenic arts, dance, music, other arts as well. Uh, the arousal of this concept object theater happens in the puppet theater. In this moment where you mention presentation, representation, and expanded theatrality, the object theater was affected by the historical vanguards like Duchamp, Dadaism, and other vanguards, but it's also related to the process of image dramaturgy and the crisis of the word and the image. One of the elements that I offer as material is the notion of parts. I use the dramaturgy of images, the concept of Jose Sanchez, and he considers, and I think correctly, that the notion of the parts as a notebook of someone who directs shows in the period where you have Kleinstein and Reinhardt. I don't know how to pronounce this very well in another language. I apologize, but he mentions this sentence of Reinhardt that says the attention of a psychological construction was displaced by the composition. The actor loses part of his identity to be material to be organized. The text loses part of its dramaticity and gains in a rhythmical rhythmal dimension. So it is going to be completed until it goes to a detail, to each gesture, each detail, each sound. This moment, sound dimensions, they are written like um, uh, a music composition. All these great European artists from the beginning of the 20s, they gave us this, and one of them is this: you're not subject to the text, to the author, but we started to think about this direction notebooks. We don't study these artists in another way. We study the way it was their scenical conception, the way they arrange the scene in a form, a global form. The Kandinsky, the Expressionist, the Bauhaus, these trends are part a fundamental period to understand direction the way you understand today. And this combination of being a visual artist, all these compounds of the scene, the text would be something beyond what we are doing. The acting would become a movement acting. This notion of music text is pedagogical, but it's going to be transformed. We continue to find this in the 80s and 90s of the 20th century. It continues to happen because you have artists that continue to do that. Robert Wilson, for instance, you have this graphic notebook, music notebooks, and it's called image theater. That what Wilson and Lepage used to do. In Argentina, you have a very intense word related to images theater. You have Salvio D'Angelo, Javier Margulis, directors that have worked a lot with that, and people who worked with this notion of musical theme. The artist that would create this totality was the director doing this composition with all the other elements that you had. Ev- Is it okay? No, don't put the lights off. I can't read. In 1987, when I was starting to work with puppets, before I had studied visual arts, there was Tadeusz Kantor has gone to Buenos Aires, and I have seen a show, and lots of artists that have seen this. There was a moment we compared ourselves to Cantor to see if we could be like him, but he always He always won. It was a wonderful experience, and I think that he adds this notion of musical theme, a kind of manifesto. Here in this book, I have a selection of some notions of Cantor. Cantor takes to the theater universe the notion of action announced by Duchamp, consecutive actions. In this deaf theater, he manifests important notions of this, the theater of his generation. The drama is a happening, the persistence of the scene and the tensions in the drama, the deformation of action, the repetition, the delay, the notion what is meaningful, the notation of movements of the actors, instead of the words, the actor like a doll. The dress is a mobile thing in the scene, the autonomy of theater in front of the text and the actor. During these years, besides seeing or being um, there in the canto shows, I think he always adds the musical theme of other artists. I think that was a composition of scenical elements that everyone has the same importance, and sometimes you have musical or visual aspects. Cantor adds everything that I mentioned, and he manifests himself in favor of the notation of the movements. So you have these big designs, which are the way he tries to describe his work, that are not uh, similar to previous plays. We have seen some spectacles in Buenos Aires from France, the other groups, but it was very beautiful as well. And also, it was very shocking for us in this group of actors that Tito has mentioned, Ariel Bufano, they could work in different ways. It's not something new now, but it was new at the time. We also work with meta theatrality with exposed objective. We didn't work with the concept of illusion of hiding. Everything that I mentioned was experimented by Ariel Bufano. I don't remember who yesterday have mentioned Tris. I think she said, I want to do that. Patricia said that. It was very nice. And I also said this at this moment when I saw Cantor and the French puppet. I wanted to do that, and this influences was very important for us who are teachers in Buenos Aires. For my group was very important as well. But it's true, we were already working with another kind of musical theme notion. We use it to call this postmodern for this. I don't think we use this term anymore. And this musical themes of these theaters, these plays that we mounted, they were not linear, but they were worked by minimal unities that communicate between themselves, sometimes facing each other. We were talking about musical theme as organical composition. We had text sequences of moments, autonomous moments, and there was things that were simultaneous, that follow one another, but it was a cut inside a framework. The association between these unities is generated by fights, discontinuity, and the assembling could make possible to rebuild a broken vase. You could rescue old models. But it is not the unity of the storytelling. The scene wanted to be a rhizomatic work, a heterogeneous thing that works beyond the coherence. The musical theme with a manifesto as a heterogeneous machine. I think that's what expresses this group, and very other groups in the beginning of the 21st century, uh, the first the 21st century. It's a heterogeneous machine that works beyond the queries. So I think that in the 21st century, you clarify and you deepen what has started as a rupture. And today we call everything that I am presenting as a scenic dramaturgy or directing dramaturgy. This autonomous um, music score, we mentioned to the director, now you are also a dramaturg. Everything is dramaturgy. So the object theaters in our continent has much more research work as the theater with actors. I think it works with the scenical dramaturgy since its beginning. No other dramatic text could have a dramaturgy as a subject that was not forecast or used for the scene. It was not possible to have this until the object is re-signified, and you have a way of have a familiarity, and you have a rhetoric of object theater, and you can find in the space with their peers and their objects, and making the metaphor appearing, and it's a new meaning for the object theaters. In the subject that I work in the UNSAM, which is called Dramaturgy for the Theater of Objects, the work I do is to exercise permanently the dramaturgical writing. We test this, we teach this, and it could have been born from the objects itself, or to have a relation with literature, which is immediately tested. We go back to the text to the scene to the text again. Or another tool that the professor that teaches the scenical direction, he must have the direction of the issue of space, and then it includes several other subjects: the relationship with the theatrical architecture. I think that everywhere, even in Latin America, this is very representative. What we call theater, if we do this test of mentioning theater someone, the first thing that you think, it would be the Italian model with a scene, an audience, and this has a big force during centuries, but today this concept is expanded. It has changed. Many of us, we do our task, our scenic task outside this. We made this in museums, in the streets, in the cultural centers. Patrick Pavis adds another notion. He's talking about space, and it's spacement, and it's in his performance dictionary. It's very interesting about what he mentions about the theatrical spaces and the devir as a time space. There is a succession of things in time. It was thought like that, but now in this digital age, we can't think like this anymore. Everything could be uh, could everything is quick. You can have the mankind, the history, in 2 minutes. So these big questions of time and space, this is for another talk, another person. But I mentioned this to the students. I try to make them think about that. What is time space? What is time? The Argentinian director Schumacher, in his book, he mentions this concept of scenical space, and that's the theatrical fact that happens between the scene and who watches. It's everything. It's a scene, the spectator, and the theatrical fact happens between. So to have this theatrical fact, you must have this between. We have to teach the students to work in the conventional theater space. He must understand what is a space, the way he can direct, the way he can work that. We have to think in this other possibility. Maybe they will have to direct in other ways. So the experience was, my experience brought me these ideas to think what the director wants to do and what is the adequate space for that. What I mentioned here is that the puppet theater had a strong link with the theatrical experience, but since the beginning, you have in the street theater, you have ritual forms and circular ones, and the puppet theater works a lot in the field of new scenical practices, scenic intervention, something that is not traditional, including new theatrical practices and that we call, sometimes we call it performance, and which is a very complex subject when you are talking with the English speaking people. We call it performance in general. So you have scene practices, and that they are not just theatrical forms. You have works that are made in the border of the theatrical activities. The performatic change of art, they present new scenarios, and they amplify the limits, what we used to call theater, scenic space, theatrical direction, and scene. It doesn't mean that the performance has replaced theater, but the analysis of theatrality must consider the new experiences that are in these borders, that are expressed in a poetic of relationship. And I'm going to mention Adriana Diegues, which is a Cuban or Mexican researcher. It's someone who writes things that interest me a lot. I think in my perception of what is in the border, what is the spaces where you cross life and art, as aesthetic creation, is the action of presence in the middle of representative practices. We call it in Latin America performatic performances, and the objects are fundamental in this practice. In Buenos Aires, I mentioned some shows that are in the border between theater and these performances. The last theater, the last show of the group Peripheral Objectives was the Child Manifesto. It's a big theatrical installation with lots of information accessed in the moment of the work itself. It was accessed by internet. There is a scenic present which is more very strong, something that can be watched only in a screen. It's a very complex theme, but we are talking about child abuse. In 2007 we have this issue that there was a show that have no beginning, no end. uh, the spectator could keep what was interesting for him, and he could continue anytime. And today, 12 years later, is something that is much more developed. What is the time space of the show? We have a lot to discuss and to think about. How are we going to configure this new time space model? It could be with these works that they started with some um, rites, ceremonies, and they could continue afterwards. It could continue on the social media, or it could continue in this space that we are physically together, and then it could continue in the virtual space. We have a lot to ask ourselves, and I go until my experience goes. This course that I was mentioned, it answers this a little bit. These answers, we have to answer these questions with the students. The students are from post-graduation courses. In general, they are artists. Sometimes they have something, a graduation new, the human sciences, and they are testing, and we are always reflecting about everything. I don't think we have reached a conclusion. We are always reflecting over things. Here you have other videos from other groups. This is show this child manifest that I said. It has this characteristic. I have done several interventions. One of them was called conceptual spa. it was related to this notion to a spa, to go to a place to receive a treatment and to improve your health or to feel better. So we used to do interventions in some places with this question: what could be a concept of spa? What kind of objects can you create to be well with yourself? But there was a certain irony, a certain relation with the shampoo. We have made that with several places, and the notion of things of carnality, of virtuality that you have seen in these videos, they were ways that I have to talk about in Spanish, all about all these things. There are projects that we have in the university. One of them was the think and the carnality, and then we added the virtuality. But we asked ourselves if the subject in this modality was not just someone intermediate, if he was a manipulator or he was outside this act. Liliana Lopes, the researcher, she says in her book Intertheatrality that theatrality, different from disappear in the 21st century, it adopts new resources in a kind of ars combinatoria that adopts new languages, documents, and builds intertheatrality. It's a concept that refers to intertextuality, but it's beyond the language. The notion of intertheatrality applies to, between other actions, to the document theater, the biodrama. I want to finish talking about the biodrama because it's interesting what I'm seeing here in these 2 days. The the experience that we have seen yesterday, Patricia and his director, that I can remind her name, Sylvie, the experience that they had made together, we could consider inside this concept of biodrama. And also the work that has been done in the workshop of objects from IAL and Heitor Capt. I think this is also related to what I am talking here. And we are living this. That is the artist's interest to talk about their own biography or biographies that are around them, that are near them. The biodrama is one of the ways to include the real in the theatrical scene that characterized these last 20 years and adds what we know about the performance from the 60s on, but bringing a regard from the theater point of view. In Buenos Aires, we have two women that work with that, Lina Arias and Bivi Telas. She had one of these experiences in 2009 in the Theatrical Center of Buenos Aires, and she says the return of the experience is the return what is personal. It's coming back of the self, but it is in a cultural, social, and political way. The document theater in Argentina has, and then the year its greatest strength because they work since the 19s with news, graphical ways, objects from people who are talking, and they are sometimes the protagonists, they're not actors, but they are in scene talking about themselves and building a biography and bringing lots of elements that characterize this dramaturgic practice. The show that I have directed with the puppet company Da Unção is called the 15 Diaries, and it has its charts. Each one of these integrants has talked about his life at 15 years old, and they recovered some journals. But when I was 15, for instance, in Argentina, there was this idea of it was an element that you have a journal, you have some stories that you you used to write in secret. So each one of us, we have talked about our teenager years, and this concept like the social and cultural spaces where these students come from is very different. This university is peripheral in Buenos Aires. It's a public university, so you have middle class students that can go to this university, but we also have several students that come from very complicated environments, more precarious environments. Each one of the participants had the moment to talk about his 15 years experience between Mexico and Spain. You have the researcher Shadai Hilarius, and she's talking about something new in this document feature. And she says about her own research, object of document theater is this theater that explores the relation between culture and the material culture. In this theater, the object is a document of the present moment where you build. It's a witness, a several political and social experience that they are not linear anymore, but they are multi-time. The written work of these authors, that has left a print in this contemporaneous world. The subjects as people who ask about the integrality, the vitality of objects, and several other concepts that are inserted in her work. I have already mentioned that in the beginning. I'm not going to read. And what I wanted to say, what is the most important part of the teaching of the scenical direction is the rehearsal. Is the most important task of a professor who has to work with scenical direction is the question to 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 make in the, accessible contents what the direction what is happening. And the only way that I think it's possible this kind of work, and I separated from the concept of time space the notion of music score, and the ones who are not the interpreters is the part of the task. I think is to direct artists. The only way that I think it is possible to decodify this aspect of the work is to be in constant essay, a constant rehearsal. The students must rehearsal. The body must be assessed by all the classes. They must be assessed all their actions to reach some goal. It's not just a manipulation of objects. Sometimes it's about gaining and losing, or errors and good things that they are doing. It's important the language to access their poetical. I don't know any directors of objects that haven't manipulate objects before. They could have been from other fields of arts. Maybe, of course, you have other artists, but directors I know, they come from the experience of manipulating objects, and they go out from this place and they dedicate to direction. Guillermo Eires, in his book of Challenges of Current Direction, the director must create a no poetic that would constitute an internal dialectic in the scenical process, between the scenical process and his vision of the world. The scenical direction sometimes is collective, but even if you don't think like this, one of these fundamental tasks is to coordinate the groupal task of the artistical team, going for a poetic that represents all of them. The task is cartographic. You have to create a map and identify a territory. This role of director is seen like this now. It's horizontal. It's much more horizontal than in the 20s. The object theater is very experimental. It's a research work, and as it happens with puppets, it uses to be a grouped theater. The challenge that the student can find his voice and could share this voice with the artistic team that could motivate them, that could create an interpretation code, that could dialogue with his time, building this shared poetic. Yesterday, when I was listening to my colleagues, I have noted some sentences. One is the following: director is a creator and not an organizer. Irina has said that in English, but I made a summary like that. The open scenario was a great change in the universe of puppets. The direction is to find the best way to tell what I want to say. Omar Adam has mentioned the orientation and the regard of the spectator, which is necessary to orient that. The director is the one who occupies himself to orient this regard. And Sylvie Ballon, she has said that the direction which she used to work was in the service of the word of the actors without bias. Thank you very much.
I think we still have a lot to talk about, a lot of reflections that can come from others present here in the conference who want to dialogue or reflect or ask. So, but I believe that within what you were talking about, we have many issues. The ability to create, the profile of a professor, artistic professor, and to think about this cultural context in which we live in, this hybridism of the hybrid cultures. I think it's extremely important to think about this when we are directing and training them to become directors. They've mentioned so many things that they've listed here regarding the functions of what we need to think about on stage in this space. It's so many things really, and we need to stay together and to work on this connection between who's executing and who's directing, the puppeteer or the performer or the director. And today we also saw a lot of concepts that emerged based on the present ideas that we have today. So I think we can open the table for debate. Thank you so much. I think it's wonderful to be beside you and listen to you right here. Last year we were together, I think in May, and we talked a lot about the pedagogical perspective of the university. And for us here in America, I think it's important to have this course in the postgraduate course that was created, as well as the puppet theater. So I think we can hand in questions. If there are any issues or reflections that you might want to mention, share. Tito, Ana. Can you just pick up the wireless mic so we can go around the room? Hello, good afternoon. My name is Nicholas. I am a. My name is Nicholas. I am a theater student here in the University, UDESC. I have an independent theater group as well, and I'm a beginner in the puppet theater as well. I wanted to bring in issue. I don't know if it's actually a question, but I wanted to know about your reflections. It's regarding the text of the puppeteer. You brought an issue that really called my attention regarding the academy and something new that happens. The students can direct their own plays in the academy, and this generates a certain stress in rehearsal in the academy. And then you talked about, and I understood, a certain differentiation between master and professor, perhaps. Who's the master of the puppet and who is the trainer of the puppets? I think there was a differentiation between concepts, and then the perspective of someone who didn't come from the theater academy. I came from another type of theater, which is a street performer, a lab performance sort of thing. And one of the things that makes me restless today, which is the which is to talk about methodology within the rehearsal room. There are certain demands and requirements, talking about the perspective of the academy first, but you need to have a pedagogical methodology even when there is not when the professor or the trainer is not present. So that idea came to me because I kept on asking myself, when the professor, the professional of the puppet, will try to apply some sort of teaching regarding direction, construction, or whatever that may be, or any other kind of layers, I think it's necessary to have this reflection regarding methodology. If it indeed exists, if you talk about it, it's something that makes me very restless. It's something that I can't see perhaps as necessary in terms of creation, and so some friction starts to happen. This week I was actually talking to my teachers about it. I would really like to stop and learn about puppet construction, but within the academy we see some limitations. And how can I do this in a more independent way, perhaps? And when this goes to the, I don't know if you understood my question, but this word actually came to me, this term came to me when Tito mentioned it, to the difference between directing and methodology. There are a lot of questions within one question, so let's start with the last one. Methodology is the word method comes from the Greek, which means path. Methodology is to find a way, a path. Until we find that way, that path, we have to keep on searching and going around in circles, maybe. So the method really comes to life after a lot of experimentation and a lot of search. Only then will the method appear. I'm not sure if we actually teach a method. We could teach perhaps different paths that were found by other people, different paths that were found by other artists. We have some examples, but I'm not sure if there is one single methodology according to that issue, which has to do with creativity. We have methods with what's technical, but regarding the creative process, you have to look for that path on your own and to create your own method, considering the paths that other artists may have journeyed, but it will be your own. We'll add something as well. I think your question is valid. I think that in the universities, we have to teach a methodology. If the course is to become a professor of something, the way of transmitting this has some sort of methodology. In addition to the specific regarding the art that was picked, there is an understanding of the pedagogical phenomenon. There's a lot of material. The university, if it has a teaching course, it needs method. But once we leave this workshop space and we start training with the masters, which is, I think, what you mentioned before, what Chito mentioned, when we think about a master, then I think there are other aspects that you need to create your own methodological characteristic, perhaps. We need to have a seminar with people who work with group dynamics or acquire some sort of freedom or autonomy in order to not teach the same thing over again. To find your own way of transmitting that to your students. Another thing is, well, I pity these poor first year, second year students because they will be practicing with you. They will be your guinea pigs, right? And so I had a training many years ago, which was in a space called education by art. It was a sort of methodology, a sort of teaching, really. But then after that, I gave form to that according to my own experience. But I think it's important to think that there is something that we need to learn in order to transmit that to others, to pass down that knowledge to others, and to awaken that creativity in others, and not only what masters or a technique that masters teaches. Hello, welcome. I am a. I was born in Buenos Aires. I participated in collective creating with Norbrisky. We created a theater. We directed our own performances. We created the score, the the clothing. Uh, there was the performance that was conducted with a some sort of lever that was being passed with each colleague that lost their lives to their ideals. So I think today in academia, I try to find the creation in isolated materials within an anarchy, which is what guides me and allows me to create. So yesterday, for example, I wasn't here because I was protesting, which was a great theater actually. That's about maintaining our integrity and to keep our universities open and not to be able to answer to any sort of boss in the United States or anywhere else. Yesterday, we created a huge theater in the whole city of Florianópolis. Perhaps it was the biggest one yet, was the largest one yet, even larger than Illinois. It was a movement. So how can we incorporate this anguish, this existential anguish of having our places for expression threatened? Because it's the second dictatorship that I'm actually seeing here in Brazil regarding with subtle oppression methods, and I've therefore decided to create a performance called Oppressors and Libertarians. My first professor was actually a pair of shoes that I used as a child, and then the hymns that I had to learn, and how to incorporate this into puppetry. I also saw Eclodin performing 30 Mil Desaparecidos. So how can I incorporate this into generations that are actually anesthetized with this digital world? How to incorporate the fight and how to free these people from these oppressors within the puppetry world. And what I loved most from Anna's speech is the humility that she has. She is a simple person. I met Ariel Bufano as well, that she mentioned. Norman is a director. He's very temperamental, but he's very interesting. I know him well. I really liked the performance of Ferro de Passar. I don't want to iron my clothes. Yes, that performance is called the House, Tatiana Sandoval. Which is the Companhia Corpo e Equipagem. This started when I was studying, when I was in the university, when she was a student, and today it's a company that works with it. These are young people, a lot of women, a lot of young women who conduct excellent work. And all the rest that you mentioned, what you talked about, I think you said it very well. I just want to add that in Argentina, we also have people in the streets all the time. We also want to impeach the president. There are a lot of cuts in culture. Argentina has a tradition with these manifestations in the streets. We had a lot of performances with these desaparecidos, missing people, and Mauricio Macri won the elections. But we conducted a performance at that time, once we left the conservatory, that left us a bit crazy because I didn't adapt very well to the conservatory, and I think the best plays, theatrical plays, were conducted there. But it's no longer called conservatory, right? It's called university. I lived in that conservatory, and we would run away to the terrace to create non-academic plays, and we would feel very free doing that. We would go into the subways to eat raw meat and next to other passengers so they could understand that during lunchtime there were people who were being assassinated at the time. It was to call attention. So what I want to ask you is the following. I think that now we more than ever we need to be on the street because militancy is actually created on the networks, but we need to be present. We need to be present in body more than ever. So I really want to thank you, especially for your humility, because I think actors need to go on a path of humility. So thank you so much, and I'll stop that because otherwise I'm going to start crying. Thank you so much for being here. I apologize for speaking very. I direct the International Institute for Puppetry in Charlevier-Mézières. It's a little difficult to talk about it here in your presence because I'll be going back to the pedagogical issue. I had in Charleville, we used to question ourselves also regarding the issue of about the position of the director in puppetry, which is a way to work the animation forms, which are many. And I thank you for the quality of your comments and the presentations. that were made. And during my question, it's actually very personal, I'm trying to share with you, is the position of directing. Is it enough? Anna, you talked about the movement many times during your intervention. And in a theater that I used to direct before, which is a theater that unfortunately closed down due to a political oppression, a very strong one, from the socialist part, actually. In France, we don't have a dictatorship, but there are some pressure points that are very strong that are made. And to go back to what I was talking about, in this theater, we had an experience, a performance, a puppet performance, that was not directed but choreographed. There was a choreographer who worked with dancers, puppeteers, and a group of 5 interpreters, 4 dancers, and 1 dancer who was also a puppeteer. The dancers had the puppets in their hands, and then very quickly, I think very quickly, after a few experiences, in retrospect, I think the dancers appropriated very fast of the movement, because I believe that the issue of the body movement, of the object movement in space, I would just like to have a reaction from you regarding this movement of choreography. Claire Gen, who is someone you know, that called Marc Tonkins, who worked with a lot with our students before and brought this dimension of choreography. And with that, we reflect on the university researches that use with the circus arts, because the circus, after all, poses a few questions as well from a pedagogical perspective, in contemporarily speaking, and especially we have an axis of research which is the notation. And then we tried to find the closest notation possible, and then we found Laban, that I'm not going to be explaining it, but we installed a lab in February regarding a puppet sequence with observers that will codify the method of work. And a few weeks later, to give partition to another puppeteer to see how we can prepare his interpretation and how to give sequence to that. It was a very interesting reflection. Thank you very much. Thank you for that. I think that it's very appropriate. Laban is very appropriate. I think it's a technique that was born for dance, but I think it's very appropriate. The use of Laban, I think, is very appropriate for puppets, for the art of puppetry. Why? It's not a coincidence, I think. Laban, within the technique, Laban is a technique, for those of you who don't know, it's a score technique within the art of contemporary dance. And in addition to this score, there are also some codifications that refer to the partenaire, to be someone's colleague and the spatial aspect of the dancer. Of course, this technique is much more complex than that, but all of the elements are absolutely essential for a puppeteer. These animated object interpreters, they have to work with not only the natural scenic space, but also with the universe where we will be moving our puppet. On the other hand, regarding partenaire, to have to work and leaving aside and its own presence to give place to someone else within the same space and to dance and to to co-live with that same person in the space. I think that's very important for the art of puppetry. When Philippe Gentil company conducted their performances, I think they have a lot of dance, but he himself says that he would rather choose, instead of puppets, experienced puppeteers, he would rather work with dancers instead, or mimes, or people or artists who have gone through the Labat technique. And that's it wasn't Philippe who said that, I forget the name. Miriam Nervaux. For some reason, it brings these results, and I use a little bit of this by Meric's advice, especially regarding the Laban technique. We don't use it entirely because it's more specific for dancing, but it calls my attention. I think it's fantastic. It's interesting that you found this way without even we haven't even talked before, but it's interesting how you found that into the other and bring this to the other extreme, and to be able to share this and to recommend to other people for those who work in this specific area. My name is Isabel Rugini, and my question is regarding the relationship between the school and the labor market. I just wanted to say that we can try to speak in Spanish. I'll try to speak Spanish. The relationship between school and the work market, labor market. First, I want to say that every time I hear about this school, I love it. I would really like to get to know these schools, these performances that we saw on the screen. I really love them. It was the year where Paco actually was working there, and it surprised me that you conducted a performance, a puppet number that actually existed in Argentina, which was extremely surprising. And when you did that number, it was the number of groups of puppet artists was very large. And yesterday I was talking to Anna Ivanova, and it surprised me that perhaps I'm not going to remember the exact number, but she said that she went to work in a puppet school in Finland that would train 10 puppeteers every 2 years, and then the school later on had to close down because the market couldn't absorb all of these artists. And what surprised me, that's really surprised me, because I think a school in Brazil would never be closed down because of the labor market. So how does this happen in Argentina in the labor market? And how does this happen in Argentina? Does the market also not absorb these artists? It's something. It's something very. It's actually strange to close down the school. A few years ago, we had to choose between teaching and or a bachelor's degree or a teaching degree. And I chose a teaching degree because there was more possibility to it. However, it was very vague. But in my time, there were very few actors who studied in the university. I think today a lot of actors study in the universities, but a lot of people in puppetry do not go through college, do not go through university. I'm not sure about the number, but I would like to learn more about how this relationship happens. You talk about that there are a lot of groups that come out of your courses. Do you take into consideration these numbers? Do you know what these numbers are? How many people are actually graduating? How many people are actually working with this? Because the moment is also changing. Well, I'm going to talk about an aspect which is about the market. In Buenos Aires, for example, we have a quantity, a huge quantity of performances on the weekends, and a great number of independent rooms, actually theaters. I couldn't say that all of these people who work as actors in these independent theaters would be categorized in this definition. They are people who actually do theater, and they have some sort of aid, and they earn very little in order to do this. They are not regular workers. If we talk about regular workers in terms of theater, Argentina has a huge problem in regards to that. And lots of times when I talk about the group activities, I talk about the people who do art outside the university in an independent way, and those that actually graduate from the university. All of them. But as for the market and how many people are there, it's very different. The market for actors is very small. It's a very small market. And an actor works wherever he can, in the movies and television and theater. When we talk about market, or when we talk about doing theater, well, in Argentina, people really do that with very little money. But regarding the acting area more specifically, I think in the universities in the past few years, there are a lot of people actually going through the universities, actors going through universities, and the puppet classes and objects and the bachelor programs that I've worked with have a little, maybe a little less students, but this still exists. But for sure, it's not stimulated enough in the cultural sector, in the public sector, in the cultural public sector. There's a lot of interest in Argentina for the arts, just like here, so they're not going to cease to exist. But the budget, if we think about budget and the budgets that are actually applied for the arts, it generates a very small market.
The other part of the question, in Buenos Aires you have 400 rooms for theater rooms. It's a very high number, but not all the actors that work in each one of these rooms, as this number of 400, many most of them they can't live on that. If you mention the puppet theater, not to if you do that is not to become rich. We can't mention labor work. If you talk about another situation in Finland, and another reference that they use, where you had a moment where you had the possibility, but it's another culture, and then they could say there was a work market, and the social governmental situation was different. Now we could compare with philosophy. We can't go after a market for a philosopher, but people will still continue to study philosophy. So in some way, it seems to me that the social situations are different. We can't say there is a market for that, for art. My name is Rita. Everything that was mentioned about this horizontal process, about the relationship between directors, professors, students, bringing this for the hybrid process of cultures, different languages. I ask myself, and it's something that I don't know if it is a question or not, to think about this hybrid thing between people, thinking about inclusion inside the theater of animated arts. I can see there is a movement in dance and theater that reflects and practices and work with that, including people not with disabilities but with their specificities of locomotion, for instance blind people, deaf people. And there is something that I ask myself, I would like to share with you this. How do you think about this in the theater of animated arts? Don't have personal experience in this field. I haven't done animated forts ways in this way. But in Buenos Aires, you have several inclusive companies, not only animation theater, but theater, and they're different companies, not only that they're not inclusive for the ones who work with people with a certain set of characteristics, but they make different problematics live together. Are actors, are puppeteers. There is a very interesting company that the director is Rosana Bernaldi, that she was our student in the past. It is Susana Bernaldi. It's called Babylonian Company. Until last year, that was the way it was called. And she makes a very interesting work. It's a company that works with people with Down syndrome. They have three actors with this characteristic. It's very interesting. Talking about Brazil, related to what she has asked, here in Florianópolis, we have study groups that are part of Sasa Goretti. She is a professor from USC with Natalia Rigo. They have a poster outside, a banner outside about the research they do, the theater animation with deaf people. And they also participated in FICA. Uh, Zell is with us. I want her to know her. She's the curator of International Theater of Animation Theater, where you have the study group from Natalia Rico and Sasa. They have a study with animation theater and deaf people. There is a research here. I don't know about Brazil, but here in Florianópolis we have. But I think it's important to think about that. The context keeps changing, and you see that you have several ways of working, and they want to do animation theater as well. They are very excited. You have a dance group that works with the deaf language here in Florianópolis. It's important. Yes, we change the context, these hybrid things that is going on. I just would like to tell something about not from Argentina but Russia in Moscow, and inside the theater Glasov. I, I don't know if it is inside the theater, but you can go for it in the on the internet. There is an experience of puppet theater for blind people. It could be weird. This There is a video where you can see and they work with sounds a lot. I don't know if you can call it puppets or animated ways or sound ways with a design. It's a company of puppeteer company that has this search for different languages and different sensorial experience. It is on the web, so you have to go for it because there is a video, and I recommend because it is very interesting. Maybe Anna could see if you know. Eh, she knows. Tá, agora. So thank you, Anna and Tito. You have raised a very important question in my understanding, which is the methodological issue of the teaching in university in a Latin American perspective, which is historical, that we come from the European traditions, but from that we make the university be the place where to go for artistic search, but all the university it's a statical choice. So we see this constant search for a new set of experiences, of experiments that can be lived in a classroom, in a laboratory. This permanent try system. It's not just a show, but the way you do it. It's a pedagogical and artistic doing. Remembering Brecht, we are living a scientific age where the man gets inside the theater and with his hat he leaves his head dead. So it's something that you think it gives you freedom. The search for identity, it's not for the market of New York or Dusseldorf or Amsterdam. We produce things that what our colleague from Senegal said is from the streets, with the children from the streets, but she gives back this relationship for the country where she lives. The Latin American context is very productive, and it's based on the study of theater history. When you think about puppets and animated forms, welcome Ana Maria. That's the paper of Ana Maria Amaral that invents this title, that we went out from this colonial tradition that is European tradition for the theater, and it makes it possible to make a link what we have happened from the Europeans and create from this local expression a universal expression. We are not talking about objects or puppets or animated person. We are teaching people. So remember the colleague from Senegal. We are going for this individual pathway, this spiritual pathway. Thank you. I think it answers a lot of methodological questions in teaching. Something that will be a freedom methodology. And I would like to thank Paulo Freio, our educator, and it's on purpose that I am doing that. That he says the following: no one is subject of someone else's autonomy. That's what we do before it's pedagogy, it's theater. This is theater. That's it. Oi, o meu nome é John Lewandowski. Nós vivemos agora num momento público onde a gente projeta situações no que a gente vê. Nós precisamos de uma história, a gente busca no teatro uma história, a gente sente isso, a gente vive as nossas vidas sequencialmente, a gente, para chegar no clímax, tudo na nossa vida é sequencial. Quando você cria um teatro que é não linear, quando você está desenvolvendo um teatro que é não linear, como você desenvolve cria um público contemporâneo, como você desenvolve o público para esse novo tipo de teatro? Como você faz o público se desenvolver para isso? Well, I don't know if it was a question, maybe it was. I have made a history of a process. For instance, in this moment, I am directing a text work, which is a story telling that it's from Argentina in the 19th century, the 20th century. It didn't say that it didn't have the possibility of having a material with a storytelling criteria. Everything we do now, we have to think also in the possibility of this, which is not a sequence, a chronological sequence, but this today it's simultaneous. We are testing and proposing things. One thing doesn't invalidate other. The contemporary creation in these modalities of creation, you have several levels, and I think there is a work that has complex aspects and they couldn't be answered with something chronological and sequential. You have several connecting works that they connect time and space, and they have a public, an audience interested to participate in the experience. Well, it's interesting that you have questions about the spectators. It's something that I didn't mention in my talk, but maybe in the next talks they are going to talk. But it's interesting to consider the audience, the publics, so we have to think the theatrical activity and objects, but also the audience. I don't know if I answered you. I don't have a very good English, but I tried to answer your question. Excuse me. I have no microphone. I can't translate. Eu não tenho respostas. It's just a contribution. Just to complement her question, the people with disabled people in the scene, there is a girl called Andressa Nóbrega. She's a reference in Brazil in research of people with disabled people and the poetic is in scene. She's from Recife, but she is studying doctorship here in UDESC, oriented by Flávio Desgrange, and her research is audio description as a scenic language. Audio description, audio description is when a person she's interpreting in libras. If you use the phone to translate the show. She understands that. She has a master in cinema and the doctorship in theater. It's a new construction of the scene. She is traveling around Brazil in a project called the, the, the movable scene. She's not, she doesn't sectorize things, and people with visual disabled, sometimes people they don't they can't see very well, and then she tried to show them what is a reflector, and one of the disabled people started to cry when he understood that the blue jelly that he was, it was blue light. So she is rethinking all the theatrical structure from that. Her name is Andresa Nóbrega. It's just to complement what he asks about the spectator. My doctorship is about theatrical reception in the São Paulo University. In one talk of Professor Philippe Choulet, who is here present, I asked him about that. When the text doesn't send us to a fiction or to a linear fable and doesn't present a storytelling, where is the spectator? Where is he in this storytelling story? So we come back to the myth, the relationship with the myth, and from that point on, it's impossible to know if the show has a aesthetic function to trigger the senses of the other. It's impossible that this spectator, he doesn't have access to the scene because he's going to invent a myth, and it's individual. So the spectator is individual in the audience. He's not a consumer, but he's a consummator of the scenic relation. He's not someone who buys the scene. He's going to complete the senses, and he's going to trigger the relations between the audio description and the rest. And just to remind Luiz Helena Balramius, she says there is an audio fiction. She has developed this in Germany, in the on the national radio of Germany. It's radio art. You have fictions like a soap opera on the radio.
It's like a sound character, the wind dialogue, him having a dialogue with the wind, just sound images. Like Moray Schaefer proposes in creating fictions based on these sounds. Just like we saw the object theater with lighting, we create these sound objects. A little observation, a remark that I would like to make in regards to the sound and sonority. Arvo Bart is a contemporary composer from Estonia. And he has a lot of erudite musics composed for puppet performances. There is a theater in the city of Tallinn. I don't know whether if it's municipal or state, but he's composed a lot of musical performances for this theater. And one of these plays was a story about that contained only two movements in the scene. It was a paper theater. And what called my attention when I went in search of this material, I heard this music. It's a musical dialogue with no words. So in this rhythm, in this weight, this ends up creating a sort of a myth, like you mentioned, and a story becomes very evident. So I think that we can still explore much further in regards to sound and the way we manipulate sound from the puppet's perspective. Good morning. Good afternoon, sorry. My name is Laurence. I am a professor from Quebec, Montreal, and I think it's extremely interesting in all of your reflections that you were able to see the effervescence of creativity in university teaching. And I have a question that's very precise that makes me reflect back to my time in the university and how this works in Brazil and Argentina. Is there a dialogue in the university between the university and the artistic environment? And if so, how is this dialogue conducted? Yes, there is. There is a dialogue, and that's the exact example that I was talking about before about this university company. What we were what we were trying to provoke this dialogue between professional artists, professional with experience, and students, graduate students that already have a sort of connection. This is a process, and the idea is to keep on doing this dialogue, trying to bring the student almost graduated to professional spaces where he can execute what they know, and also to make a connection between master and apprentice, this rebirth, in order to bring this to the present, to try to make this connection to the past between master and I think the relationship between what happens in the scenery and what happens in the university sometimes happens and sometimes it doesn't. I think the theater environment in Buenos Aires has a strength between objects and other kinds of theaters. And amazingly enough, in these past years, a lot of young people who have worked with this come from the university. This wasn't always the case 10, 15 years ago. For example, when we would do a casting for an audition for an official theater play, most of the actors who would show up, they were studying with known, renowned masters who were actually nominated. We mentioned a few, and they talked about, and they were referred to these masters. I actually auditioned. I conducted an audition for my own play because 80% of these people studied in universities or schools, college, universities that were always public, and without that, that would have been possible for our countries to have had theater schools. So it really surprised me. This still exists. The image of the master, and in the puppet world, this still happens, but it's slowly starting to become extinct. So the universities take this first step. They take these masters, they bring these masters to the universities because they're able to generate more methodology in order to train these people artistically. But there's still a distance of sorts that, in fact, I think it's something that's starting to happen. However, I think it's relative because you can have training. You can have training with a master's that could be excellent, but the image, the figure of this master who trains you through osmosis, so to speak, I think is decreasing. You no longer work through the transmission of content alone, and this gives the person autonomy, independence to the person who's graduating, because he needs to think about his own training path. I think that's important. We cannot be the mirror of a master. This probably happened in the past, but now we need to be more autonomous and to have more diverse training. I'm sorry, I forget the name. His name, David? Don, desculpa. John, desculpa. You, you, you based on the fact that we have this linear temporality. At least that's what I understood. Okay, I'm not sure I understood it correctly. And because of that, how we work with the public in a non-linear way. So my question is this a presupposition? I don't know if I agree, or at least I have some issues whether we're linear or not. I think in the Western tradition there is linearity, yes, but I was watching a TED lecture the other day that talked exactly about these new generations and that the synapses are creating new ways, and how the son of a friend of this person, I'm not sure, I remember who it is, but he would watch two movies at the same time, and he would never watch a single movie. He would always watch two movies at the same time, and that, I think, these are different synapses from different from my generation. This presupposition of linearity in which you're based on, I think it's something that interests me. I really want to discuss about this more. If these new generations also work this way, their brains, or are we changing and going someplace somewhere else? It's great that we can actually make these reflections without having the need for questions and answers, that we can just let it out there. But sometimes I think, lexically speaking, I think there are a few differences. When we talk about sequence, for example, it's not the same as linear. So I think that the question perhaps refers more to the creation of sequences, of sequential process, because they do exist in the development of these proposals. There is a modality, like I was saying, in the sequence that is not strictly linear, but there is, though. And this sequence, in this way, sometimes due to a shock, like I mentioned before, if they're interconnected or not, this happens anyway. That's why we're able to talk about score. That's why we're able to talk about score. There are other types of score. Olá, meu nome é Terence. Eu sou de Singapura. É minha primeira vez aqui nessa parte do mundo. Então, desculpa se as minhas perguntas não estiverem muito claras, mas o problema que eu estou tentando resolver no meu país é tentar ajudar a dirigir esses marioneteiros, pois essa arte está se extinguindo, está desaparecendo. Então é uma pergunta baseada no campo em si, prático. Então a minha pergunta é: existe uma maneira para do diretor ter menos conhecimento, porque não há nenhum tipo de arquivo, de registro, e eu quero aprender com eles e tentar ajudá-los a manter este tipo de arte viva. Num país onde a arte não é mais tão apreciada, então termos o senso de modernização e de desenvolvimento é necessário da minha parte e, ao mesmo tempo, um aprendizado e trabalhar para manter e sustentar as tradições pelo outro lado? Essa é a minha primeira pergunta. Existe uma maneira de fazer isso? E qual seria a melhor abordagem para um diretor que não seja um mestre e que esteja trabalhando com mestres, no entanto? A segunda pergunta é, por causa disso, muito dos trabalhos que nós fazemos, porque não há nenhum tipo de universidade para teatro de animação, ok? Então, há um espaço para trabalhar dentro de um laboratório e talvez a bagagem e o desafio que eu tenho de experimentar com essa bagagem de tradições em público. É possível fracassar? Não é problema se fracassarmos? E como trabalhamos com esse tipo de expectativa? Podemos fracassar nisso? E a outra pergunta que eu tenho é, se a forma da marionete é não mais apreciada pelo público, será que nós deixamos simplesmente isso morrer? Ou será que é o meu trabalho relatar e arquivar o mais possível sobre essa forma de animação? Ou eu deixo simplesmente isso morrer? Eu vou começar pela última pergunta. I think that this depends on the director. If this will work or not, that depends on the expectations of the director. Lots of times we do what needs to be done because we need to express without having to think about the receptor. Sometimes we need to think about the receptor, yes, but it's very particular. That depends on a lot of things, and it also depends on society, on the cultural environment. There are cultural environments where the word market, what our colleague mentioned before, the word market, for example, may have more strength than other social environments. Lots of times, there is a producer that needs a performance, and so he produces a performance, he invests on it in order to bring that performance to life, and he needs a answer to this sort of investment. So in that case, that really depends on what he's in search of in terms of results. If the director is in search, tries to train due to necessity, as opposed to getting something in return, and that happens a lot in the independent theater in Argentina, for example, a lot of things are done without expecting anything in return. Of course, we try to do everything without any losses. So if there are no losses, then I think we've already won in that sense. So it really depends on each cultural environment, I would say. And also, you mentioned about the tradition. I think and I'm going to insist on that. I think it has to do with the decision of the director. We cannot deviate a tradition. We can base ourselves on our tradition and having our own perspective and try to perhaps modernize it a bit in our own style, but in respect to that tradition. But these are aesthetic decisions that depend on each director. It's very difficult to give you an answer that could be simply yes or no. And I also think that it depends on the director's decision. I think so too. And I would just like to say something about your question, which there is a great discussion going on about that issue, which is, should universities also work in transmitting these important traditions, cultural traditions, where they're inserted in, and the way these transmissions are done? I think, yes, the university has to do that, and it has to be within the present context of things. It's a very difficult job, and what we ask in these courses, and that the short time that we have, we need to sustain this tradition. In Argentina, for example, there is a tradition that's younger than the one that happens in Singapore, most probably, which is the puppet, the glove puppet. And that's our tradition. So I think that a student, if he goes to university, he has to learn that technique. He has to read uh, bibliographies and learn and know more about this culture. But for that to happen, he has to be in university as well, in order to question himself and ask, what's what what's more out there? Is that the only tradition that matters? Is there something else out there? So we try to update that. We have to establish the contact with the culture of the time, and then try to update, and at the same time conserve what we have. But we want to try new things in different ways. Should we get attached to the technique? It's a question. I think for me, it's very important. I talked about in this case specifically in object theater and the expanded scene. I talked about this particular topic, not all the curricular program of a university, because there are many points as well. The history of performing arts, puppets, techniques, interpretation, what kind of techniques we should teach. I didn't talk about these more specifically. I just wanted to talk about directing. And just to add something in regard to the experimental, the experience, just linking to what I was talking about before in regards to limitations, limits. To experiment and to leave the perimeter, first we have to be within a perimeter and get to know and then get to the limits and then try to push these limits, and to have the courage to jump over these limits and go beyond. I think that's an important issue. And then once you're beyond those limits, when the student, and this happens to a student, we can't forget where we come from. I think it's necessary to, that's why I think it's necessary to learn about these traditions, especially to have this information, because if we don't know where we come from, we can lose our north. So now it's 10 minutes to 5. How much longer do we have? Okay, Irina. Eu não sei se tudo que eu digo é importante, mas eu acho que o tema do nosso encontro é como nós ensinamos a direção, a encenação, e se há vários tipos de ensinamentos. Eu quero perguntar a vocês algo que está relacionado a isso. O seu trabalho é muito interessante e as suas palestras foram bem densas. Eu gostaria de ler um livro sobre isso. É bem difícil, na verdade, de ter uma ideia melhor em pequenos fragmentos, sabe? Então, dessa forma de expressão, eu estou acostumado, porque eu vou a exibições, comecei isso há muito tempo, trabalhando com arte conceitual, mas enfim, isso não é nada novo para mim, mas é difícil de julgar isso. Em síntese, o que eu gostaria de perguntar: como você ensina? Colocando de uma maneira bem simples, você pega as pessoas das artes mais nobres, das artes finas, objetos, materiais, como vocês falaram. Também a questão da tecnologia, high-tech. Qual é a sua abordagem para trabalhar com isso? Você pega esses alunos que já têm essa abordagem, que já usaram essa abordagem, ou vocês têm tempo para deixar eles explorarem? e para tentar isso ou aquilo e aprender a usar a mídia, eles são estudantes de artes visuais, por exemplo? Eu what you saw in these images is a postgraduate course. What you just saw in these images in the video, these are this is part of a postgraduate course that I teach, and I teach the last class, which is directing, and on scene. This postgraduate course presupposes that students have a previous training. People who subscribe, who enroll into this course, they may be actors, artists, puppeteers, visual artists, musicians, and they may also come from human sciences as well. I believe people who come here have a certain practice, and there are many disciplines. One of them is interpretation, theatrical, and of objects, and so you study the manipulation and interpretation, the words that we're used to using, and then we have to know later if you use the same words. There's dramaturgy, there's a workshop, but it's more related to hybrid objects, electronics, and other types of materials. But they still haven't gone digital yet. In the second semester, they do the execution of digital objects. They start practicing and start from scratch. We do as best we can because it's a workshop. There is a lot of content that we have to teach, and then there are theoretical disciplines as well. Some of them, like the story of technology, for example, in the 20th century to the present, the object in arts and in the vanguards today, the visual installments, interactives, objects, sound objects, like we mentioned before, and lighting objects. These are the disciplines that we teach. And the last discipline, in addition to having a methodology, it's a writing workshop, and then we have the directing, how to put everything on scene, how to put the play on scene. You have to do sort of a montage, and it's open. It could be theatrical, it could be an installation, but you need to they need to have studied that in the course, either objects or theater and interactivity, and the concept of interaction is discussed throughout the course, and that comes with a theoretical reflection. They need to write a play. This needs to happen because universities come back to the criticism and the theory, and they forget about the practical side, and then practice gets lost. So this is what used to happen before. So this postgraduate course demands this. There needs to be a work that adds to have a writing on that. And that's what happens where I teach directing. In the graduate course, which is called Bachelor's in Theatrical Direction, in the Performing Arts course at university, we talk about space, time, languages, post dramatization, expanded scenes, new formats, montages, all of what I already researched about. That they all have to do with this discipline, which is directing. And so this is exclusive to this area. And so what you saw here, they were more related to postgraduate courses. today we also see what Ana and Tito mentioned. There is a plurality in puppetry, in puppetry theater. And to finish, I believe I actually wrote this down before, when Mauro mentioned Paulo Freire before. No one is subject to another person's pedagogy. I think each context is different, is unique, and we have to understand, as directors, as actors, as performers, as puppeteers, that the sensitivity of the being and the perception that we need to have in being directors and in teaching this art, I think it's extremely important. This touches upon the individuality. We as human beings, we are unique, and our creations are also unique, and that's why it's extremely important to reflect on that when we're creating. Each creation is different. Each creation is unique, and I also wanted to talk Alexander Terence Tran. Yes, on the 20th, we will be talking about creative processes in dialogue with traditions. I just wanted to let you know, and maybe we can continue to talk about what you asked here today. And also, during the next few days, we still have 4 days ahead of us. There are going to be a lot of issues are going to be raised, and we can interact with what Ana and Tito brought up today. I would also like to include something from my experience as a director. I work with shadow theater. There's a lot about perception. I also bring the physical education to the table, the cognitive side, the autonomous side, and it's very important, I think, within in this teaching. But all throughout, I think we're going to be able to work with this and reflect more upon this, because they are all conferences that are going to be debated upon later on. So thank you, Ana. Thank you, Tito. And thank you, everyone, for your presence. We follow up. We follow up with a little bit of a break from 5 to 5:30, and then we'll be back